Going to get started in a minute. I just want to thank all of the planning staff for helping putting this together. I did the presentation, and Norma Aguilar is our city secretary, is going to present also this afternoon. So this morning we're going to try to keep it to 90 minutes, and then we're going to have break for lunch around 11:45ish. That's when Jason's Deli is going to show up. So you'll all get a boxed lunch and sweet tea, etc. And we're going to walk down to or take the elevator to the third floor for lunch, and you can use our conference room. And then after lunch, we'll come back just for an hour, and Norma is going to talk about code of ethics, Open Meetings Act, more of the legal side of it as our city secretary. This presentation here is really going to be what to do in meetings, how to make effective decisions, and particularly for ZBA, the first module will really be focused on what you all do, and then the rest of the presentation will kind of be what for the meetings will be everybody, and then the last 2 or 3 modules will be specifically for P&Z. But again, the ZBA members want to stick around, you're more than welcome to, like I said, when we get to zoning and subdivisions. So I'm just going to start. Does anyone have any questions before you answer? After each module, I will take a break so that it's interactive. So if you can, just let me finish each module, and then once it says questions, that's when you guys just feel free to jump in and ask us for clarification. We have Maria Prieto, I'd put her on the spot, but she's been here a long time as our current planning manager, and some of the other staff are here to field any questions I don't answer. Does anyone have anything before we begin? Shane has printed all your presentations. We've been wanting to do this for a long time. Other cities do this as well. And just again, a lot of you have backgrounds in development anyway, or you've been on your boards for a long time. So probably just due to experience, you know a lot of this stuff already. But this would just give you a chance to meet each other, talk to staff, and address any questions or concerns that you have, and kind of follow that, that structure really, so that way, you're being good stewards of the city as you are, and also it'll be better, for the public as well. Because a lot of the Joe and Jane public, they may not understand some of this stuff. I didn't before I got into it too, and probably all of us, right, before we went into a city government building. So I'm going to, like I said, this is just going to be fun and interactive today. So yeah, I'll get started on the first slide. So we thought that we'd just bring all of you together because, again, there is some overlap especially when we're talking about public meetings. So that way you get to know each other a little more as well. And Norma's presentation is going to be great this afternoon. So training overview, module 1 is going to be, we're going to talk about the Zoning Board of Adjustment and what is a variance. Then we'll get into Planning and Zoning Commission rules. That will include ZBA as well, because the meetings are open meetings and public meetings are generally the same. And then 3 and 4 3, 4, and 5 will be specifically for P&Z. Then we'll break for lunch, and then Norma's going to talk about open meetings, code of conduct, conflict of interest, those sorts. That's her area of expertise after lunch. Okay, looks like a lot, but it's not. So we're going to move through pretty quickly, probably just 10 minutes for each module, and we'll break, ask questions, and then keep going. Okay, so specifically for ZBA, this one, again, P&Z members wanted you to get a chance to as well to see kind of the interactions there, and there is some overlap. So what is the Zoning Board of Adjustment? It's a quasi-judicial board or body in Texas that grants special exceptions to city zoning ordinances, ensuring alignment with the ordinance's intent and purpose, conditions, and safeguards. So there's really 2 things that the ZBA has power to do. And most of us just think of the first one, which is a variance. So a variance is a site-specific approval allowing a reduction in a setback, maybe an increase in height. So where they don't quite, so what it means is if the use is allowed, okay, so you can never give a variance where the zoning doesn't allow the use. So you can't say it's zoned for single-family residential, I'm going to give a variance for a bakery. You can't. You would need a zone change. That would go through P&Z. However, if it is for single-family and the person wants to build a garage that's only 20 feet from the front, and the zoning says it has to be 25 back, you would have the authority as ZBA members to allow it to go up to 20 feet. what you want to do is be sensitive to, and we'll talk about the criteria in a minute, you want to be sensitive to the surrounding area. The difference really between the two boards, the ZBA, it's much more micro, it's much more looking at neighbor versus neighbor. And then P&Z is looking more of like the broad neighborhood and what's that zone change going to do. So the ZBA member, it's not P&Z looks at details too, but your role is really looking at those site-specific details. So if you allow an increase in height, that's going to block sunlight to the neighbor. The neighbor's going to be upset, right? So it's those kinds of things. And again, I think you all do a good job already. I've come out to a few meetings. This is just a little bit more information. The special exception, which isn't used as much, has certain things in the zoning ordinance. So it allows, for example, non-residential uses, a decrease in parking by 30%. It allows you to have, which again, a lot of this stuff doesn't come up often, but if somebody had a 3-acre lot and just happened to be zoned single family, one variance is that they could put a mobile home on that lot in a single family area as a second dwelling. Would we allow that? Would we want to recommend that? In most cases, probably no, but it is something that's in there. So there's about 5 or 6 exceptions as well, and we can share those more afterwards for you. 90% of your work, though, is going to be variances and not special exceptions. Same idea, it's just a couple different things. So the legal authority comes from Section 211 of the Texas Government Code. So long story short, you're all in for 2-year terms. There's the chair plus so there's 7 regular members, and then 2 of you are alternates. So the alternates, if one of the regular members can't attend, or let's say that person resigns and you're short, say you're only got 6 members, that first alternate can come and fill in at a meeting. You need at least 4 members to approve a variance. Other cities, it requires a supermajority. Now, if 20% of the residents in the area, including alley and streets, right, in that circle, oppose the variance, then you would need a supermajority. So if 7 of you show up, 75%, 5 out of 7 isn't quite 75, so you need 6 to vote yes. In most cases, it's just going to be a simple majority. Another city I worked in actually set it so that all meetings had to be 6 out of 7, but to avoid any confusion, if there's no major protest by residents and 7 of you show up, it's just 4 people have to say yes for it to pass. If it's a tie, it does not pass. You can amend your motion, and you can maybe tweak it a little bit as long as it's different enough from the first motion to allow maybe a smaller variance. So if you all vote and it's like they want 20 feet and they say no, you could still probably reopen it and say I'll give them 22 feet instead of 20 feet. So those are options as well. You can approve what they're requesting. You can modify what they're requesting. You can deny it outright and say no. And the fourth option, we'll get to in a minute, you can also table it. So if they don't have enough information for you to make an informed decision, one of you can make a motion and then second it, and you can proceed to table it to the next ZBA meeting until they give you a better site plan or they give you more information. So you don't always have to vote on everything. So these are the types of variances. So again, we talk location and setbacks, maximum lot coverage. So single family is 70%. So maybe they're building a bigger house, and maybe they need another room for their family member, and their really large lots are not causing any impact. So again, with ZBA especially, you're really looking at case by case. So it could be appropriate, it may not be. What you want to be careful is whenever you make a decision, the danger of setting a potential precedent for more decisions. So this is the unfortunate part of city government where maybe a previous ZBA wasn't always maybe a little more flexible. Flexible can be good, so I'm trying to think of another word. They might be a little more too loose, and they might have approved like an 80% variance or something, and so now another customer comes in and says, well, hey, I should be able to get 80% lot coverage. If the rule says 70, you want to try to stay as close as you can to 70. So even to go to 7, there's no hard and fast rule, but to make a big jump like that, they really need to have factors like maybe they don't have, there's a natural grade on the property, something to do with the land. So like if 30% of their land is an easement, that might be a justification for a variance because they've lost 30% of their developable area. And it wasn't something, we'll get to the test in a minute, it wasn't something they created. If they create the problem, then they don't really have a hardship. But if that hardship test we'll get to in a minute. But if they don't create the problem and it's something natural about the property, like the land or the slope, that could be a factor, or there's a giant tree that's been there 100 years in the way. That might be a factor to allow them to do a variance. Okay, so you have a lot of discretion. You also look at variances from signs, and then again, reduced number of parking spaces. And then so these are the exceptions we were talking about. So non-conforming uses. So someone reconstructs a non-conforming use, so a property that doesn't allow the bakery. If it's destroyed by fire or elements, you can allow a variance to have them rebuild it up to 60% of its reasonable value. So that would just be what it's appraised as today. So they wouldn't get a full build, but they'd be able to at least go back. You could also go the opposite. You could discontinue a non-conforming use as long as the structure's full value can be amortized. So you can say, hey, I want this factory, shouldn't be here anymore. It's non-conforming. But then they would have to, that would only be in a case where then they wouldn't lose any money. So that's hard to do. That's why nobody really uses that one. Again, this one is odd because I kind of interpret it as a use variance, but again, it's in our code, so this is kind of one exception to that rule. You can permit a mobile or a HUD manufactured home on a lot with a single family home where the single family home is zoned correctly. Again, I probably not appropriate in a very small, typical residential subdivision, but maybe in an area where they've got like 2 acres or something, or temporary, that's something that's option. Parking spaces, this one, again, not used very often if the floor elevation and the public works director is comfortable and it's slightly below that. But again, there's FEMA rules. So, and then antennas and structures. So exceptions don't come up very often. As you can see, those are harder to get. How do you interpret, 60% of reasonable value? Do you really want a mobile home in a single family subdivision? So those things don't happen as often, but they're options for people. So the difference is the variance is really a standard, right? Going from 25 feet to 24, you're dealing more with numbers. These are more like an actual, something very specific to the use. Okay, so these are the 4 tests that you need to look at as ZBA members. So this is right out of the Texas Government Code 211. So number 1, A, the variance is not contrary to the public interest. Okay, very general, right? And they did it, I think the state, most, where I'm from too, originally, a lot of states and provinces have those rules because they want you to make those decisions. They don't want to be too strict because then they're taking away your power. And so, we're a home rule city, private property rights state, and so we really want the board and people to have that flexibility in Texas, which is fair. So that's up to y'all to interpret. But again, it's really, the goal is not to try to squeeze it in to make it work for them. You want to be helpful, you want to be flexible, but you want to make sure that it is in the public interest. So if there's a 2-story height restriction and somebody in a single family neighborhood wants to go to a 5-story house, that should be a no, because that's not in the public interest. But maybe someone's got a grandma that's disabled and they want to put a small addition in their backyard. Again, that's not, unfortunately, there is fair housing rules and all that, but that can't be the only reason. So you definitely have compassion, but make sure it's still following the rules. If it's a minor addition, it's not hurting anyone, it's in the backyard, it's a reduction of like 2 feet or something, that's probably in the public interest because the neighbors couldn't really, if the neighbors can't really tell what's going on, by looking over the property, and it's still close to the setbacks or the numbers, the requirements, it's probably what would be considered as reasonable. And you have the discretion to do that. Even us, like we debate all the time in our staff meetings nicely, and we have differences of opinion, and that's okay. And that's why each of you you're all representative of the community. You all have different, academic and education or the jobs that you do during the day. So, some of them are close calls. They might be a 4-3 vote. That's okay. If you're the one dissenting opinion, that might be good for the future, because then we can look into the future and say, well, maybe there is something to that. Maybe we want to look at it differently. And that, again, things change. B, special conditions exist for the applicant that do not generally exist for others. So again, perfect example, there's a huge crater in the backyard. They can't build there. The land wasn't graded properly, and they're losing 30% of their lot, but everybody else has a perfectly flat backyard. That would be, so topography is always going to be a special condition. Another one could just be they're doing something like the drainage area or a slope. So most of those are related to the land itself. Human-created hardships, as I was mentioning earlier, is not a condition for a variance. Now, financial hardships, we'll get into in a minute. That wasn't the case until the state changed that law about 3 years ago. There are some exceptions where you can use money as a factor, and we're going to go over those in a minute.
You know, there's 2 bills in the House and Senate that are going to maybe change that, where people are going to be able to build like mother-in-law suites and things like that. You are aware of that, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So that's coming.
That
And
could
again,
affect
this could all change. Some of this could change in 6 months. Connie's right. A literal enforcement of the ordinance will result in an unnecessary hardship. So again, so that has to be something that they didn't create themselves. And we'll get to those in a minute. And then D, the spirit of the zoning ordinance is observed and substantial justice is done. Again, very broad statement. If you go to the purpose statements of the city code zoning ordinance, that's generally what they're looking at. Health and safety, lessen congestion in the street. So, allowing a larger home or let's say a reduction in parking could be a problem, right? Because then they're going to park on the street, and that is going to create an issue for traffic. Prevent the overcrowding of land. Avoid undue concentration of population. So all of those purpose statements are in the zoning ordinance. So D is really just a broad statement. So if they have to meet all 4, that's the big thing. And the hardest one usually is C, it's the hardship. Because a lot of them, well, it's not really affecting the neighbors. It's whatever, but then they can't demonstrate a hardship. So that's the one you want to be careful on. These are some additional criteria for the hardship test. So a hardship, again, would normally be the topography of the land doesn't allow them to build, not something that, I enclosed my kitchen, or I enclosed my garage for a kitchen and now I don't have space for a vehicle. That's something they created. There is some sort of gray area if you could go back and look at permit records and see that the previous owner was the one that caused it. That's kind of I'm not an attorney, but I would say that's kind of an open one where they didn't create the problem, the previous owner did. But even then, you want to be sensitive to the surrounding neighbors. So these are some of the extra hardships for that were added to state law recently. Compliance cost exceeds 50% of the structure's appraised value. So if they had to bring it into compliance and not get the variance, if that cost would be more than 50%, they could use that as a hardship. Now, it wasn't there 5 years ago. Compliance would result in a loss of at least 25% of the area for future development. So maybe by pushing it back, now there's that ditch is in the area that they moved it from, so now there's no room to build. So again, just common sense. The compliance violates the municipal ordinance somehow or the building code. So maybe having to move it to another spot, they can't do that because the building code says you have to be 6 feet from the property line, and now by making them move it, they can't. 4, compliance causes unreasonable encroachment onto adjacent property. So that's kind of weird because we wouldn't approve a -2 setback onto the neighbor's property, but there could be something where by pushing the building back, they end up encroaching onto the neighbor. And then finally, the structure is deemed non-conforming by the municipality. So if that's the case, then they're already non-conforming, they can't meet the test. So if the city creates the non-conformity or deems it non-conforming, then it creates an issue. So again, these aren't used very often, but just the citizens do have that power if it comes up. Normally, it's those first 4 tests. Okay, almost done. Module 1, public meeting. So the variance or exception, they submit the application to planning. This is the part that some of you don't see, right, but that staff does. We have to send written notice by city and state law at least 10 days before the meeting to all the owners within 200 feet, including the property owner if they're the ones requesting their variance. The ZBA, so you all meet at the meeting. We have to post it 72 hours before. And then you need at least 4 members to vote, and you need a quorum. So it's got to be a 4-1, a 4-2, or a 4-3 vote. So if only, let's say, 3 members were to come, we wouldn't be able to have the meeting because you wouldn't have a quorum. So just keep that in mind. And then lastly, there is an appeal to a court. That's only if they question or challenge your decision. So if they think your decision is, where I'm from, it was called frivolous or vexatious, but in Texas, I guess it's the same idea. Basically, just the decision is not, it's a question of law. So they think you, not that you were unethical, but that maybe you didn't follow the procedure when you made the decision. So if they say, well, it's not that it's a hardship, but that they shouldn't have really used that factor as a hardship, or they didn't follow the ordinance. So one thing to avoid any of this in the future is when you read your decision into the record, give your reasons, even if they're just general. So say that we believe that the variance should happen, or the variance we recommend, or if we recommend denial, why? Well, so we don't believe it's a hardship because of X, Y, and Z. And most of the time, you may go with staff's position in the memo. So if Maria's team writes a memo that says, we don't think it's a hardship because they're the ones that created the situation. They want to build a bigger garage, bigger than everyone else on the street, and it's only 70% coverage, and they want to go to 95. Well, that would be, you would just want to state that in the record, that we hereby make a motion to deny the variance because we think that the 95% is much larger, and they don't have a hardship for that, and they don't meet the, or you could just say they don't meet those 4 tests even, and it's just generally, just something so that they can't come back and say, oh, you never really told us why you didn't approve it. So, and you can keep it as simple as you want. I just think that's up to you, but I think that's helpful. So best practice for decision making. So maintain communication with staff, and this goes both ways. We want to, and sincerely, like, we want to have a good relationship. I think we already do. Maria's done a good job of reaching out, and the staff, but give us a call. If you see something on the agenda that's kind of weird, we usually post it by the Thursday, and then the meeting's on the Monday. So give Maria or one of the staff a call and say, hey, I'm not sure what this means in the memo, and that way we can talk about it before the meeting so that you're not kind of ambushed by the customer, or we're not ambushed either. We can help each other out. The biggest one is drive to the subject property. A lot of planners, including me, like maps, and we're used to seeing things in 2-dimension flat on a piece of paper, but you really see kind of how things are when you go out. I had to do that when I wrote the carport ordinance, because I really needed to see what impact is that going to have on neighbors when we create those standards. So really, it's looking at it in 3D. Take pictures if you want. Use those notepads we gave you today, something like that. Review the staff memo in advance, and then at the meeting, again, before the meeting, we try to arrive 15 minutes early. Ask Maria, ask the staff, I'm still not sure about this. I know you called me on Friday, but I'm not quite sure if it meets the tests. And so your job is to interpret that, but you definitely can ask questions for assistance, and not because you guys know what you're doing, you're professionals, but that's really why staff is here too, to just kind of help. So that's all. And the last one's the most important, that I want to make sure it was in the training. Do not talk to each other unless you're friends or whatever, and you want to talk about the football game. That's fine, but just make sure you don't talk about any public business outside of the meeting. If 4 of you, especially in an email, so if 4 of you or more, that's a quorum, are chatting about business, then it could be considered a public meeting, and then that violates state law, and y'all could get in a little bit of trouble for that. So just keep that in mind. If you want to talk, this is the place to do it, or again, call staff for help, but outside of the meeting, you want to avoid kind of that public business. Training sessions like this too, the reason we had to post it is because, again, more than 4 of you met. It's a quorum, so it is technically a public meeting. Even if the public doesn't read the agendas, they're probably not concerned, right? Because it's not actual cases today, but it's still technically a public meeting. Town hall, kind of the same idea. If we're talking about something that's upcoming, Norma will get more into the details, so I might not be 100% on that, but that could still be construed.
So I do have a question.
Please.
Because we do meet in that room over there, in that conference table, right? And they do ask questions. I do let them know how many cases we have. Sometimes they ask me, are there any issues with any of them and everything? So that would be considered part of the meeting, correct?
Yeah, I'm going to defer that to Norma when she comes. That's a good question. I think that's probably appropriate because, again, you're not you're kind of going over just generally?
Yeah, I'm going over the agenda,
Yep.
letting them know what's coming or what they're gonna be, seeing up here. But like always, I don't give my opinion to them, you know,
Yeah.
I just let them know what's coming, what they're gonna see, how many protests we've received and stuff like that, things like that.
I think that's right. So what Maria's basically saying is, as long as you're not discussing your opinions or, you know, do I want to make this decision or that decision, I think if it's just, again, we'll get Norma to verify. So I've got that question down. But I think that's probably okay, and most cities do that. But we'll verify that with her when she comes. Okay, well, that is it. Any other questions for the ZBA? We're done module 1. So I'm going to try to keep going here. We've still got plenty of time.
So if those two, those bills pass, that'll just change everything that we just talked about, right? If those two.
Potentially.
Yeah, so
Did you want, yeah, feel free if you want to just share that again, those two bills, because we'll look them up. And then we can get ahead of the game if you want.
Okay.
Help you guys too. Or maybe just what they're about.
Okay, I'll tell you what they are real quick. I just got back from Austin.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so there's, let's see if I can even read it. So there's Senate Bill 673, allows the ability to build accessory dwelling units, ADUs, by right. And then there's House Bill that follows up on that, allows the ability to build accessory dwelling units, and that is the House Bill 1779.
So the second one was also ADUs or different?
They're both. So it's a House and a Senate bill. So there's two of them. So the one is for the House and one's the Senate. So Senate Bill 673 and the other one that'll, you know, so that they both can pass. One's a House and one's a Senate bill.
Got it, okay.
Okay.
Do we know which members brought that forward?
Use is for the Senate bill.
Do we know if they're in the majority or the second party? And the reason I'm saying it is there's still the option of whether it passes or not.
I think it's a majority. I think they both are majority. And
Okay.
so the other one, House Bill 1779 is Busey. And so, and that was House on Busey. I can send all this to you.
Sure.
There's a lot of different ones on there that have to do with property rights and housing affordability that probably would affect you guys too as well. But I got a whole sheet of things here. You probably don't want me to go through it. It'd probably take it.
No, that's okay.
I'll
We
send
really
it to you.
appreciate
I'll
that
send
too.
it to you, yeah.
I have a
Okay.
question.
Yeah.
But are they approving like detached with a permanent foundation or not like these little storage
No,
that
this is-
people are just doing?
No,
Okay.
these are like granny suites. No, yeah, there's.
Nice.
And there's some that, easy conversion as far as, from commercial properties to, multifamily units to, where they're easily converted.
Yeah.
You know, without-
Do you know if they would allow rentals as well, or do you remember if it said that?
There's something that deal with rentals too as well.
Okay. Yeah, so what I will say is we had attended an advocacy through our planning association group, and there was a bipartisan push last year, like you were saying, for more infill type of housing, also for workforce. I believe it was a gentleman from Nebraska and then another one from up north somewhere, but
Of course, this is in Texas, so since we're in session right now, so that was probably on a
May
national
have-
level, so this is since we're in session right now, so this is Texas, so.
yeah, so I think, yeah, it's definitely coming, and depending on what happens, as Ms. Coots was saying, with if state law changes, then the cities would then have to update our zoning codes to make sure that we're allowing those types of uses, and so
Yeah, it
that,
wouldn't be effective and probably until, they could put it in effect in September, but a lot of times it'll be September or January the following year. Normally, it's kind of what that takes place normally, I think.
Okay.
Following year in January, so.
yeah, so I think it's probably coming sooner than we think, and I think it's just the affordability issue is really hitting everybody across the board, and so looking at ways of doing that. I would suspect, I have to read the bill, but it will allow the city some flexibility so that Odessa could do it differently than Midland, and Midland can do it differently than Abilene, so that we might hopefully be able, if that's the case, we'll be able to put our own standards, and we'll certainly loop you guys into that process if we bring any ordinances forward, I would think. So, thank you for that, yeah. Anybody else have any questions on ZBA? And we will ask about, Maria made a good point about the meeting before the meeting. So we'll get Norma to verify that, but But yeah, it's really just those 4 tests. So, just, like I say, reach out to us at any point. If there's nothing else, I'll keep moving along here, so we're on track. So this module is looking at really the meetings themselves and how they're conducted. So this is really, there's some components in here that are also ZBA. So this is really for everybody, this one. So specifically for P&Z, what is the role of the Planning and Zoning Commission? So now we're getting into y'all. It's to recommend boundaries for original zoning districts of the city. So if we bring forward a brand new zoning ordinance, that's something that the Planning and Zoning Commission can review and give us feedback on. If we bring a new comprehensive plan for the city, or a downtown master plan, we would also want your input on that and including with the stakeholders, as again, you guys are going to be the ones voting on any future amendments to those plans. So it's zoning ordinances, it's plans, also subdivision plats, minus those amending plats or those minor ones that Maria's team, the planning manager, can approve. Most of them will still come here. Some cities are changing that or have changed that, so that it gives you guys able to focus on some other things as well. Lubbock completely actually delegated all the plats to their planning staff, which is kind of surprising in Lubbock that happened. And then other cities are still, surprisingly, most of the urban areas are still keeping it where it goes to P&Z. So, and then some cities are kind of in the middle on that. So you have all the platting authority in Odessa. 90% of the plats are going to come to y'all as well. So you got zoning, you got plans, you got plats. Some little things too, like a master sign plan. So if it's almost like a variance. So if somebody's trying to get maybe more square footage of their sign area so people can see it, instead of going to the ZBA, we might allow through a master sign plan, Maria, correct me if I'm wrong, but they could do a bigger sign and maybe just have less signs and then just do one. So there's...
Well, currently we do have it, whenever there is an increase in height or size of a sign, we do bring it to the ZBA board. I'm not sure, you said it might come in the future, or is...
Yeah, like there's certain things in the code that allow it to, not where the sign area is increasing, but like maybe where there's flexibility. So instead of doing this number, it's so like if you have, let's say Burger King wants to put a sign and they don't have enough room and McDonald's is next door, it would allow them to put an off-site sign.
Okay, so now that would probably go to P&Z.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, but yes, when it comes to increase in height, it's increase in dimensions,
ZBA.
that's still CBA.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so conducting public hearings. So why does this matter? The biggest thing of these meetings are for public engagement. So you really want to hear all of the stakeholders. It gives the public a chance to talk and express their concerns as well. A lot of them end up going to council, and I think that it's, once they understand the importance of our boards, a lot of this stuff could be dealt with through you all, and then not necessarily tied up at council. Council is really the final decision maker on those bigger situations, but you guys are really, like us, pretty close to the ground. So I think so number one is it's to promote transparency. That's why we have the Open Meetings Act. That's why somebody can get a public record and request information, so that I think Texas is really good about that, being transparent with the public. Addresses any concerns about planning decisions and gathers valuable feedback. So if everybody's coming in for variances, let's say on a setback, maybe it's time to reduce that setback to 20 feet and that's why the carport ordinance, whether you liked it or not, it was something that we were asked to look at. And again, just how do you deal with that in certain neighborhoods only? In other neighborhoods, that's why we did the overlay, because we knew the east side of town, they don't really need that. They've got 60-foot lots. They're building new homes. They want garages. They don't want carports. Older neighborhoods don't really have a lot of room, and they were stuck. So carport was an option there. So, okay. So the Open Meetings Act, we're going to skip this. Norma's going to be talking about this. But meeting procedures. So this is for both of your boards. This is probably one of the most important slides today, so I'm going to go over this one carefully, and then we'll move forward. So for each board, you need 4 members to hold a meeting, and so you're basically doing this already. There was just a couple of nuggets I added so that it was clear. The chair starts the meeting. If the chair is not present or absent, the vice chair starts the meeting. If the chair and the vice chair are not there, then you all vote at the beginning and decide who you want to be the honorary chair and the honorary vice chair for the meeting. And you can just do that motion quickly at the beginning of the meeting. It's fine after the before the meeting starts. So before the pledges and all that, you just say, we hereby don't have those two members. We're going to appoint Kyle as the chair and Connie as the vice chair. Okay, so that's an option. Chair announces each item into the record, or whoever the chair is. Then the presenter can come up. This is optional, but Norma had asked me about this, and I said I would include it in the presentation. So normally what council does, because they have so much volume of work, is, and so do you guys too, you could limit the speakers to 3 minutes. So we try to present pretty short anyway, but I'm saying if Joe Public comes in, say it's a Walmart, and nobody wants the Walmart, I'm fine with Walmart, but I'm just saying, then, and there's like 100 people with pink shirts saying no to Walmart, what you do there, if you have like 100 people, you would work with them and suggest who would be their speaker. So one person should represent an entire group is more fair. If they're all individuals, then you got to give them a turn, but you can limit it to 3 minutes. I think we have a timer or something, or a beeper that we could bring to the meetings to help you. So again, any contentious cases, it's something to think about. If it's not a contentious case, and you only like ZBA, there's one case that month, somebody wants to talk for 5 minutes, that's fine. It's up to you, but you are allowed to stop them after 3 minutes. You have that authority. Okay. Chair closes the public meeting, and then the chair asks the commission for comments. Number 9, then the chair, if there's no comments, everyone's presented, the chair asks the commission, does anyone wish to make a motion? Anyone can make that motion. Obviously, it doesn't have to be the chair. The vice chair could just be one of the commissioners. Then the chair, so the chair is leading it, right? So they're the ones speaking. And then you'd say, does anyone want a second? Then the second commissioner can come in and talk. So that if the chair is leading it, the chair is probably not the one that wants to make the motion or make the second, but if nobody answers, then they can also say, I seconded, or I first did, whatever. Then the chair announces the final result. Again, a tie it does not pass if it's a tie. Now for zoning, for P&Z, right? P&Z is just but you're the review board. You're the recommendation body. So the city code says it still goes on to council anyway. Some cities, if you say, I want to deny it, it stops, and then it forces the customer to make an appeal and send a letter to Maria. Not the case in Odessa, which is probably better, so we don't have to wait and try to find an appeal letter. It gets lost in the mail or in an email somewhere. So basically, the Planning and Zoning Commission says, yeah, we support the zoning, or we think it should be denied. So that would be a recommendation. It's a recommendation to deny, or it's a recommendation to add a condition. That would go into the record, and then Maria's staff would create a memo for City Council that would say that the P&Z on this day voted 4-3 to recommend denial, because you can't deny, but you can recommend denial, or you can recommend approval, or third, you can recommend approval with a condition, or so call that a modification. The last one is you can table it. If it tables it to the next P&Z meeting, it does not go on to council, the zone change. Okay, so then you go back and then come back again. Again, I'll double check with Norma. I should know this because I've been doing this a long time. I'm 99% confident you don't have to then send out letters again. So if you table it, the objective is all the public got the first letter, they came to the meeting. Now you want to table the zone change for 30 days to get more information as the P&Z members, you can do that. And I'm pretty sure we don't have to send letters out again. We just have to publish it 72 hours before. Okay, so you could defer that to another meeting. We're going to get to plats in the last module, so we'll talk about the 30-day shot clock because there is some exceptions.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Everything that we recommend or not recommend goes to the council no matter what, or just certain
Everything where
cases.
you're just the recommendation body, it always goes on to council. Now with plats, if you're the approval authority, go ahead, Maria. No, it's okay. I was going to say for subdivision plats or things where you're the approval authority, they would then, once you make a decision to deny, they would have to then appeal to city council. But anything where you're just do their recommendation, like a zone change, so you're not the final decision maker, Where anything where council's the final decision maker, anything you say, yeah, it just keeps going.
So, and just to clarify, those items that do go to city council are the zoning cases, the specific use permits, and, the site plan approvals. You have a plan development zoning district, which they're gonna submit their site plan at a later time. It comes through Planning and Zoning Commission and then goes to city council again, so twice. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. We'll cover that too in a few minutes with the zoning module, but yeah, anything goes to council that's an ordinance has to have the two public hearings. Some cities I've worked in, I don't want to get off track, but if there's something like a resolution for something, so it's not an actual ordinance, that usually only has to have one meeting. If it's just a resolution or they're just making a decision that doesn't require an ordinance, I think they can do it in, that may be up to our council. Yeah, discretion, okay. Okay, this one's also very important. I had done the presentation and some of the staff told me to include this, so I created this slide as well to know the difference, because again, every city's different, so the difference between a consent, a public hearing, and miscellaneous. This is really important because a lot of the time the public doesn't know, and they will try to speak on certain things and they're not authorized, they're not allowed to do that under state law. So let's go through them quickly. So on an agenda for P&Z and ZBA, you do your Pledge of Allegiance, Texas Pledge, and then we get into the first thing, which is the consent items. Usually we've got minutes, we've had a meeting the previous meeting date or the previous month, and so one of the consent items is almost always gonna be the minutes, okay? For P&Z, final plats, most cases also go on consent. The reason is you've already had a preliminary plat before the final, so the preliminary plat was discussed, and so therefore you still review the memos, but this allows you to approve them faster and we don't have to necessarily talk about each one. So the consent agenda, there's really no discussion. It's just basically things that you can pull it off consent and you want to make a motion to do that. So if I'm a customer and I'm saying, you know what, I have a question about the final plat. I'm very concerned about, the planning department's recommendation. I don't really agree. They can come up to the microphone and request that item 1 be pulled from the consent, and then you guys could turn it into a public hearing and let them discuss that one item. So that's an option. Okay. So the other thing is, if you have the minutes and you have, let's say, 3 final plats, or if you're ZBA, you have the minutes and maybe one other discussion item or whatever, something that's just on consent, you can vote in a single motion to approve all of the consent items. So you don't want to vote for each. If there's 3 items, you don't want to vote for each one. You just want to say, I, Commissioner X, make a motion, and then I, Commissioner Y, second the motion to approve all of the items on the consent agenda. And then when staff does the minutes, they would just do that. Okay, so that's how you should be doing the consent agenda meetings. Okay, public hearings. So these are the items that usually state law or city ordinance require to be public. This is for ZBA and Planning Commission as well. So all the ZBA cases, right, because we sent out the letters to the 200 feet, et cetera, all of the zone changes, all of the SUPs, the specific use permits, we'll get to those in a minute too. And then for subdivisions, the only ones that have to be public hearings are either ones that staff decides. So you would have the authority, Maria, if let's say you're recommending denial and it's kind of contentious, you could still put it on consent, but it may be good practice to put the contentious one on a public hearing, and that would be her discretion and along with the customer. So mostly though, for plats, it's only residential replats where the zoning only allows 1 or 2 dwellings. Or what's not shown here is there's a deed restriction. So maybe the zoning's multifamily, but there's an old deed restriction out there that says we only allow single or 2 family housing in this area. That too it almost never happens, and the onus is on the applicant to provide that deed information, not staff and not you all. So don't worry if they don't show it. There's no, as far as I know, there's no implications. So most of the time it's going to be zoning. So if you're zoned single family 2, which is only allows single family housing, and somebody had a lot 5 and they want to cut it up into a 5A and a 5B for 2 homes instead of 1, that would require to notifying everyone within 200 feet. There are some changes in state law I'm aware of, and we can get into that another time, but where there is an option to not bring that to P&Z, and that could be then, the letters could be sent out after the case is approved. We don't do it that way now. We have to follow our ordinance. So right now we're doing it, the 200 feet, and the newspaper as well has to be published. If 20% of those people in the neighborhood, like a zone change, are against the plat, then you would need a supermajority as well. The difference, though, with the plat versus a zone change is if they meet, most attorneys have said, if it meets the technical requirements of the subdivision ordinance, you have to vote yes. You have to approve it. So if they've put in their road and they've extended their sewer and water, you can't vote and just say, well, I don't like it. You know, whereas a zoning, you kind of can, right? You can say, I don't think this fits in the neighborhood. If the zoning already allows the subdivision and they've already met the engineering and planning requirements, normally it's going to be a yes. So it's kind of ironic. Well, I shouldn't say that. The state law still allows the public to be heard, but in really the public would have to, it'd be harder than zoning to protest and oppose something. They'd have to really show that this plat is inappropriate. I've seen a case once where all the lots were 1 acre. There were no deed restrictions, and this was in a single family zone where the lots only had to be 5,000 square feet. So this industrious developer came in and cut up the 1 lot into 5 pieces, and all the 1 acre properties were very, very upset. They met state code, they put in the roads, they met engineering standards, had to approve them. On the economic side, they got 5 new lots, but of course the neighbors were worried about their, property values because they said, that's not fair. I bought it at 1 acre. Well, the zoning says you only really need 5,000, so probably should have changed the zoning. But anyway, that's neither here or there. So again, if it meets all the technical requirements for plats, you want to move forward. Okay, check the time here. Okay, so we've got about, I'm going to whiz through this pretty quick. So the meetings, it's the same as the ZBA. Okay, so it's the same thing. You make a motion, you pass, and then at the end, the chair announces the next meeting. Same thing with the motions. So you can motion to approve. This is for both boards, motion to approve with conditions or disapprove in the case where P&Z has the approval authority, so that's subdivisions, sign plans, and certain site plans. So there's apartments. I think there's, Maria, I have that list in the ordinance if you need to see it later, but there's 6 types of site plans that P&Z, so they're usually administrative, where Maria's, you don't see them. Somebody comes in to build 2 or more buildings on a lot. Maria usually has the authority, her department, to approve those administratively, and then it goes straight to building permit. But there are certain types of uses that require it to go to P&Z. And again, for ZBA, all of y'all are just looking at variances.
So you want us to state our name every time we make a motion? You just said that. So are you wanting us to state our name just prior to you asked us to state our name before we make the motion? We normally don't do that.
No, I'm not sure if that, sorry if that got misconstrued. No, absolutely
Okay,
not.
you just said that, okay.
Okay, no,
You just
no.
said-
Okay, that may have just been misconstrued. Okay, and then you can also, we talked about tabling. We talked about amending, so you can, here's the 4th one that I wanted to include the parliamentary procedure on that. If a motion's already made, you can amend that motion, okay, at the same public meeting. So it's usually used to, it says here to fine tune. So when a condition has been added, so I make a motion to amend the original motion by adding condition 5, et cetera, you are able to do that at the same public meeting. Once the public meeting's ended, that's it, it's over. But that just allows a mistake to be corrected or something like that. And then finally, the customer can come in and request a withdrawal. And then that can also be, they can withdraw at the meeting, but they have to come up to the stand and make the motion. If they send a letter to Maria before the meeting, if it's before the 72 hours and it's before we've posted the agenda, it dies. But if the agenda's already been posted and now they want to withdraw, they need to either physically show up, which is better practice, or they need to give the letter to Maria and her staff so that the planning department can come up and say, hey, on on Friday before the agenda was posted, after the agenda was posted, so-and-so wants to withdraw their request, and then you all would then vote on that to say, yes, we were comfortable with that withdrawal. If that happens, they got to start over and pay again. But it is an option for them if they get scared or they're like, well, you know what, we don't really have the money to move forward on this project, and they figure this out at the last minute, or, you know, God forbid there's another pandemic, and then they're like, I don't want to move forward right now. Okay, they can still withdraw if they want to, and you guys would just vote it into the record. Okay, best practices for both members: be informed, be objective and fair, engage in open dialogue, and maintain transparency. I think it's really important that I understand the part about giving too much information. A lot of us planners, you know, we like to talk, or we like to share things just because we're very passionate, but I think it's okay in the sense as board members to do that up to a point. I think, you know, there's kind of a misnomer out there that if I give too much information, it can be used against me. Maybe so, but at the same time, you're representing the community. You want the public to respect you as well as you guys respecting the public. And so I think they need to understand that, yes, you're volunteers, and yes, you're appointed by your council, but, you know, you're all professionals. You all have, have different interests and perspectives on things. And so therefore it's important to have those perspectives represented and to really make those decisions in the benefit of the community. One more point on this, I think it's important, is like if ZBA especially, right, it's usually a neighbor versus neighbor. So I want to reduce the setback and the neighbor doesn't like it. The rest of the community, they may never read those letters. They may never see the agenda. Most people sadly don't read the newspaper anymore. It's another thing they've been talking about. There was one bill, I think it was last year, where they wanted to actually take it out of the newspaper and just have it posted. I think maybe that might happen one day. I respect the OA and what they do, so it's probably, they're not going to like that, but that's up to the state. But as of right now, this meeting is really the best way for the public to show up and be heard. They don't have time really, to meet their senators or their Congress people, but locally they're able to, at least it gives them a chance to come out and know what's going on. And if it's only 2 people that show up, but there's 20 people on that block, they're going to talk, right? So that person's going to say, oh, you know what, the ZBA approved my case. This is called the ZBA, and this is what they do. And then more people kind of know about it. So, like I said, I think what all of you guys are doing is great, and just keep up the good work from what I've seen. But this is just, again, the transparency thing of why we have those public meetings and why we have to say the motion and the second. It's just really to be helpful and to have a standard process that's so that everyone's kind of treated fairly. And I think that's really what they're doing. So that's the end of Module 2. So we're over halfway. Does anyone have any questions?
Couple comments.
Sure.
You mentioned that the chair could make motions. Typically, we haven't done that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really anybody can make the motion. I think I got that from the parliamentary procedures, which is what council uses, and so I think generally if no one else does, then it's the chair, but I don't think the chair has to initiate it.
Yeah, typically we haven't.
Okay.
And whenever the chair and vice chair aren't here, typically what the staff has done in the past is select the member who'd been here the longest, rather than having a vote.
Sure.
Is that okay?
It is, but I think I'm pretty confident if staff initiates that, then
Yeah.
you guys just want to say into the record that you agree with staff's recommendation. And then you can allow staff to decide who wants to be chair and vice
But
chair.
I'm not going to be here next time, Connie.
Okay, what day is that?
It's first Tuesday in April, 5th.
Another thing is we usually decide in that room. We don't
Yeah.
do it here.
Yeah, we do it in there as a group.
Yeah, I would do that here
Here.
so that there's
Okay.
public transparency and they know that the chair and the vice chair is out.
Or at least announce it here.
Okay. I'm gonna be
Yeah.
here on the 5th, I think, yeah.
I
I'm
have
going to the Masters, so just make sure it's not the week of the Masters.
No, just next
Third.
week.
Okay, that's next, I should be here.
Oh,
The 3rd.
Yeah.
April the 3rd,
I
I'll be
didn't
here.
hear, thank you.
I'm gonna be here.
I had a question.
Sure.
I think on the consent items, we have had a public approach, and I'm not sure if I don't think we realized, I think it was this past Thursday. So what are we supposed to do about, like, 'cause
That was in the miscellaneous portion of.
Oh, that was
the
miscellaneous.
Agenda, yes, and she wasn't actually supposed to approach, unless it was public hearing.
Okay, I found this on the web.
Sorry.
you, where you going? You need
I don't
directions?
know, I pressed my button. There's a-
Request.
Sorry
Just
about
kidding.
that. But yes, she approached the podium and, in that situation, would I say something? Would I let her know, this is not a public hearing, or would, the board?
Correct, yeah. So you would let them know it's not a public hearing, and then they would have to come up to the podium and request that it be taken off miscellaneous and it be made public to talk about. So they have to make that request. If for some reason, I don't know what the issue would be, you're not comfortable, you could deny them that, I believe. So,
Well, typically, when I'm acting as chairman, I'm in favor of transparency and openness, and I'm more inclined to permit a person at least make a statement, and then kind of see if it's relevant.
yeah,
Is that-
so you can
Without-
do
without
that.
Converting it into a public
Public
hearing.
hearing.
Yeah, all that means is that one individual, not necessarily everybody else, but that one individual then have an opportunity to speak on that. But I think best practice is if it's on miscellaneous, or consent, yeah, is really not to do that unless there's a really good reason why that person needs to speak. So for example, if it's miscellaneous, and I will verify it with Norma, the developer, I think, with their request to come up, could then request to speak about it, or the applicant, somebody that's privy to the case. But I'm going to double check with her. I'm pretty sure if it's it's just someone random that's sitting over there that wants to talk about a plat on miscellaneous that has nothing to do with it, doesn't live in the area, I think that would be one to say no. Because otherwise, if it's public requirement, we've already posted it as a public meeting. That gives them an opportunity to come up. But if it's on miscellaneous, it's not part of the public meeting, I would, again, so unless it's like, say, LCA and it's their plat, I think that would be a reason to open it
And
up.
I think we've had that where, obviously, it was someone working with a consultant or the
Yeah, I
consultant.
think it was.
So,
That when we were discussing it, we would have a question among ourselves that.
And
we
how
were
would you
trying to
really know
resolve.
unless you
So-
let them speak, right? If it's
So
relevant or not.
Before, and let me just let you know that before we bring these cases up to P and Z, we do have a plating conference. That person was present at the plating conference, and we do discuss the
Procedures.
conditions, the comments and everything that are required by the city staff. Okay, so she was, indicated that, we would need these changes done. She complied at the time during the plating conference and said that she would bring them about. However, she came up, during P and Z and wanted it to be amended or removed, actually.
I think it was like a rename or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so.
One of the conditions was.
And the commission,
In that-
I was so
we were-
confused with it.
as
So
I
in this
recall, the
case,
commission was confused
she
about
would
what
We
request-
were
was
very,
going on.
Yeah.
it was, because
Yeah.
we weren't
And
sure
we
what
weren't-
the
we couldn't
rename
tell
was.
what was going on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so what happened was
Yeah, I
that,
remember that one.
we had already discussed this with her, but she kind of moved it again into P and Z. And so, what happened was, in a situation like that, does she request or can, if she wants to speak on behalf of the case, does the commission request to open a public hearing for this certain case, or how? How can she approach?
speak and then, withdraw or not?
No. She wanted to speak on the case. It was in a miscellaneous,
Okay, but is she represented?
she was representing, one of the developers, the
Yeah,
engineering.
so I think that's good. We'll double check with Norma, but I'm pretty
Okay.
confident she can do that.
She can do that, it was
Yeah.
fine, I think.
You would just have to then make a vote to allow it to go to a public portion to allow that person to speak.
But they don't have to reschedule like to the next month. We
No.
just create it
Yeah.
right then and
That's
there,
right.
and then you let her speak.
Yeah, just like consent. If something was on
Fine.
consent, I was saying, so you can, consent or miscellaneous,
Yeah.
you can just make a vote. I have a motion to pull this off of consent to a public meeting,
Okay.
and therefore, in order to allow this individual who represents the case to speak. What I will verify with Norma, and I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, but can someone from a third party who is not, or someone else randomly in the meeting has nothing to do with it? I'm not sure. I think the answer still is yes, but I don't think it's good practice. I think it's only those people, like Maria was saying, that have a stake in the case, like the developer or the representative or the owner should be the only ones that should be allowed to speak on a miscellaneous item
And that person did clearly.
or consent.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and in that case then, you're saying that procedurally, we should have a motion to make that particular matter a public
Definitely.
hearing. So
Yes.
I need a motion.
You have to.
Second, if we're asking that person to come up and educate us or give us some additional information.
You have to, yeah. You can't pull something off consent or miscellaneous without making a motion to do that.
Okay.
And
Makes
on
sense.
consent, I understand you to say that if we've got 6 items on consent, someone can make a motion that we approve all at one time.
That's correct.
Because I was told at one time we couldn't do that.
Yeah, no, you can.
Okay.
And again, because it's state law, it applies to any city. I've worked, again, I love Odessa, that's why I'm still here, but I worked in another city for almost 10 years, and that's how they did it. They just made one motion, so I'm confident on that.
So if
Okay.
we have 10 on the consent, I can make a motion to approve all consent, all 10.
Yep.
And we second now.
So next week, if there's 10 on there, I want one of y'all to make a motion to approve all
Yeah,
10 of the
yeah.
consent items.
Elizabeth, you were saying council does it that way anyway.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this ends the portion for the ZBA. You're free to stay, or you can come back take a break for 30 minutes and come back for lunch. It's up to you. But the last modules here are going to be specific for the Planning Commission, because again, they have that other role where they have more cases they have to look at. So we're going to meet for lunch around 11:45 on the 3rd floor. So again, feel free to stay. I'm going to try to get through this quickly. Jason's Deli should be here in about 30 minutes. Okay, so now we're going to look at zoning. This is probably good for ZBA anyway, because what are y'all doing? You're giving variances from the zoning. So this is more for P and Z for changes to zoning. So there's 3 types of zoning. You're changing a map. That's the most common, right? I want to go from SF3 to R retail so that I can put in a bakery, and it's on a corner next to other commercial. It's not really used for housing anymore. That would be an example of a map change, right? 200-foot notice, send it out, everybody comes out. The second type is normally initiated by staff or by council or you all. That's where it's just a text amendment. Sometimes the text amendment is citywide. So the one we have going very, very soon is going to be the ordinance to take away mobile homes as a permitted use in all of the zoning districts except for the ones that say mobile homes. It's a big change that will be coming down the pipe. We'll be having those notices being sent out. So I think that's fair to say because we've already had work sessions on it. So I'm being transparent with you all. That would be an example of a text amendment only. You're not changing the map. So the people's zoning is still the same on their properties, but now they can't do something they could do before. Or it could be in the positive too. It could be written to say that now no one has that 25-foot setback, right? We were talking about earlier. Now it's only 20 feet across the board. So that text amendment now could apply to an entire zoning district. Could imply to we could change the parking standard and say offices are now only required to do one space for every 400 square feet instead of one space for every 300 square feet, and that would apply across the city.
Sorry, my
Please.
question is, if they received the 200-foot notice, would they notify me and let me know they received it for their property and not be a part of the board?
You mean like if the members?
Mhm.
Good point. Yeah, Shane is correct. So if for some reason it's in your neighborhood and somebody's requesting a zone change, there is a potential for conflict of interest. So Norma's going to talk about conflict of interest this afternoon. I think the rule there is, yeah, the ethical thing I would think is to step aside because it's affecting your area. And so if you're against it or for it, there could be a potential bias there. You may not violate the conflict of interest provisions, by the way, because you're still a citizen in the neighborhood, and you know, you should be able to vote freely on something, but you want to be careful with that. I think it's more prudent to step aside, but she's going to go over the conflict rules later today.
I'm gonna tell
Good
you,
question.
one of the other things that there's another Senate bill and House bill that says prevents a municipality from unreasonably regulating or restricting the installation of new HUD code compliant manufactured homes.
So they're fighting against that?
Yes.
Do you have that bill number?
Yeah.
I'm going to look that one up too.
It's Senate Bill 785 and House Bill 1835.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's good, so we'll note that. It's probably a blessing we haven't sent that out yet. But yeah, if there's any impacts there, we'll get with the city manager and
That's
have that
interesting.
discussion. For
It's part
sure.
of the new affordability thing, so we can't restrict people from putting manufactured homes on their lots.
It's probably for affordability
It
as
is
well.
affordability,
Yeah.
so
Even if all the homes are single family, they can put,
as long as they're HUD, yes.
HUD
it's
approved.
Wow.
HUD approved.
So it may not be a mobile home, but a manufactured home? Is there a distinction in that?
Like a modular?
Well, no.
after 76,
same.
1976.
There's a difference.
There's a difference. There is a difference. There's a difference.
Well, if it has a serial number.
In mobile homes, that's where this issue is. But also, correct me if I'm wrong, every local government can adopt any of those, or.
Even if the
Well,
state,
You can't, no, that's changing, no, because then this is gonna keep you from restricting, that's gonna be unreasonable, so you're not gonna be able to restrict that. So that's a new law saying that you cannot put that into place, that'd be unreasonably restricting, because if HUD allows you to do that, that means that you can no longer do that.
Would zoning apply in that case or no?
No.
Or how
Not
would that
allowed.
work?
have to remove our ordinance.
Even if they
If the state law is
protest, right?
stricter
What about
than ours,
deed
then we
restrictions?
have to go by the state law.
Well, we can't.
Subdivision restrictions.
so maybe not on deed
No.
restrictions, but on
I
just
don't know.
regular
In
lots.
an area, I think that would keep it from applying, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're saying that government
just
can't do
government.
that, yeah.
So they can jam their plans. That one, we'll see if that one passes. I'd be interested. I'm thinking.
You're gonna have to read that and see what it says. I gave you the bill.
Yeah.
I gave you what it said, yeah.
we
That was one of
appreciate
the
it.
big ones that they were talking about too, and it was really hot that they were talking about.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot coming down. One I will share with you too, because I did read this one. If there's something where, like a simple zone change that's not taking away property rights, so they're not outzoning something, so just a simple map change, there's one bill that says now they need 60% of the people within the 200 feet instead of 20%.
That's Senate Bill 15, House Bill 3919, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah,
So you knew
I was
that.
gonna give you that one too.
You know, I can't get anything by you. It's okay though. Thank you. Okay. So, yeah, so there's an example of that one. Perfect timing. So, for zone changes, state law, okay, so you can recommend boundaries, you can do the text amendments, and then our ordinance, so right now it's 20% or more. So there's the buffer map that planning staff created for a case. This is an irregular shaped lot. So you go 200 feet out from that aqua blue, and then if 20% of the land, so even if see how that one to the bottom,
Just
the
gets a
buffer
little
kind of
corner.
cuts it in half?
Mhm.
Okay, so if that person opposes it, when you're calculating the 20%, and staff will do that for you, we're only taking the area inside the circle. So like the L shape that's on the bottom of the circle, it's hard to describe. I need like a pointer. But anyway, it's only the part of the property that's in the 200 feet that counts. And streets and alleys as well get it. So it makes it a lot harder when someone protests to try to pass it, right? Because they're counting the streets and the alleys as well.
And
So
that's-
then they need a supermajority. Now, they don't need a supermajority with y'all, they need it at council. So if P and Z, say they do a zone change, remember, you just recommend, you don't make the final decision. So you say you recommend denial, and more than 20% of that area between the aqua blue and the black is filled in, then what it means is that council now has to have 6 of their 7 members to vote, supermajority. If there's a quorum of 4 people only that show up, which usually they're pretty good, like you all with the tenants, then at least 3 of them would have to vote yes, right? Because 75%, 3 out of 4 is 75. So just keep that in mind. It'll make it harder. So again, you guys don't need to worry about that for zone changes, because you would just need a recommendation regardless, but council would have to implement that one.
And that's 200 feet from the property line?
200 feet, yes,
All
sir.
the way around?
around.
There's some uses, don't worry about this today, but I mean, if it's like a landfill or something noxious, like, I think it's like 1,000 feet or 700 feet, but almost all the cases, it's just the 200. So what's in a zoning ordinance? Well, it's almost the same thing as a variance, right? Except instead of regulating a standard, you can also regulate uses of land, changes of uses. So height, number of stories, for zoning, percentage of a lot. So all this already goes into the zoning district that's created. With the one exception is a new district could be created called a planned development, a PD, or an MU, a mixed use, which is basically like two or more different uses in the same district. And so a PD and an MU allows the developer and the city to work together to come up with more flexibility. So example, straight zoning, it's SF2, you must have a 25-foot setback. You could do a PD without having to go to the zoning board of adjustment. And in the specific PD zoning, I could say, I only need 20 feet. Or maybe I'm allowing more density. I can flex those standards through a PD without having to do a variance each time. And that helps because sometimes you want straight zoning, like maybe if it's an older neighborhood or a newer neighborhood and all the houses look pretty similar, you want to keep that consistency on the street. So maybe that's where you keep SF3. But maybe there's somebody wants to do, I don't know, like a mix of like townhomes, apartments. It doesn't fit into the traditional zoning district categories. That might be one to do a PD for. Okay. So those are the state requirements. The basic ones you have to know for the city. So just like ZBA, you have that 4 criteria. For us, it's 3 things, and they all tie back to what's in the state. By the way, those 7 things are kind of stated similarly in our zoning ordinance under purpose. So that's the more general standard. So just like a variance, does it lead to potential for fire? So if somebody's trying to change the zoning, and they're adding more density, that's something that you want to make sure that is that really appropriate for the area. So is it comprehensive is the first test. Is it compatible with the surrounding zoning? One of the things in Texas and elsewhere is something called spot zoning. Okay, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. So see how there's my bakery shop again? If that whole neighborhood is all houses, you can see the rooftops. Somebody wants to put a bakery in the middle of the street and change it to commercial, and all the zoning is single family, that's spot zoning. That's not allowed. You do not want to make a decision or recommend a decision at P&Z to say that that's okay. Now, if, let's say, half of that block just got rezoned for commercial, and now they want to put another smaller, maybe commercial next door, look at the second picture, the transition. So let's make this one easy. I have townhouses on the west side of the property, and I have a commercial zoning, a big mall on the east side, and I have this vacant donut in the middle, right, with nothing. An appropriate zoning there would be multifamily apartments, because apartments are a little bit more intense than townhouses, but a little less intense than the commercial shopping mall. So that's called a transition. That would probably win and would not be considered spot zoning, and that's appropriate. So one of my there's some pros and cons to that, but if you've heard of the term new urbanism, it's just a fancy term. It's really old urbanism, but there was a gentleman in Florida. His name was Andres Duaney, and Duaney was was trying to go back to the neo-traditional type of planning where you kind of have those transitions, so they call them transects. So long story short, so that kind of led to a lot of the form-based zoning where instead of looking at, well, only single family over here and only commercial over here, that basically says that common sense would be having like a step up. So if you're on a major arterial street, you don't want to put single family housing there. So you want to probably put your commercial uses or offices along the major street, but behind it, right, might be a good place for apartment buildings or for townhouses. And then as you go deeper into the furthest away would be probably your single family. That just makes sense. I've seen cities that, again, more urban areas, there's differences. So I use the term Odessa appropriate. So it should be Odessa appropriate for the size of our town when we're looking at that. So a transition would not be a 7-story apartment building. If the townhouses are 2 floors and the mall is 3 floors, then you'd probably look at doing the apartments between 2 and 3 floors, right? You wouldn't want to make that go way up like that. So you have to look at what's appropriate in each situation. So as long as there's a transition, or you're rezoning it to allow something that's surrounded by things that are of the same type, you're probably okay. You just never want to put a donut hole of something that doesn't fit within that neighborhood, because that's spot zoning, especially when that thing is more intense than what's around it. Now, people will ask, and we'll move on in a minute, but somebody will ask and say, well, why can't we have some commercial in residential? Why can't we have a local store that someone can just go to, like a convenience store? That's fine, but then it should be near a major street. It should still show a trend. It shouldn't be in the middle of the block like that. So because there's housing on all sides, that's why it's not appropriate. If that west side, where you see that west side of the street was all commercial there, you might be able to squeeze a small retail store, even if it's close to the single-family homes with fencing and landscaping and things like that. So obviously, it makes sense to have. That's how Dollar Generals get in, right, all the time. They're smart, and so they'll put it on the end of a street or near a park, so it's a transition. But they would, if they try to put it mid-block, your first call should be, no, we do not recommend approval. That's spot zoning. Okay, so just some little things.
Well-
So just that transition, and you should be okay.
Yeah. Well, at times I know we have approved where they have asked for permission to put either a beauty shop next to their house. That's spot zoning, or how would, and we have approved it, and of course.
Yeah, the rule of thumb is if the beauty shop is adjacent, like touching another property that also has commercial around it. So if it's a house on one side and it's commercial on the other, that's not necessarily spot zoning. So if the commercial, especially if the commercial side is more intense, so if the commercial side had let's say, I don't know, a clothing store, or let's say a restaurant that's going to generate more traffic, the beauty shop would be a good transition between the restaurant and the drive-through, which got a lot of traffic, and then the single-family housing to the other side. So that would be appropriate. It's just not just think of it like a donut. You don't want to ever put it right in the middle where everything around it is residential. But if it's one side is commercial and one side is residential, and you want to go commercial in the middle, again, that's something where that's not necessarily a yes, and it's not necessarily a no. That's where you look at the conditions of the ordinance. If it's a bigger property, one option might be a PD, because the PD zoning, you can put conditions on it. So that's where you could say, with the PD, I can require them to put a fence. I can set hours of operation. I can make them put shields on the lights so that the glare doesn't affect the neighbors. So you have the authority to do that. Okay, so that's the PD. So there's certain types of PDs that are allowed in Odessa, so medical center and office, but number 9 kind of covers, and 10 kind of cover everything. So if it's a transition, like we were talking about, between something more intense and less intense, you could do a PD, and a combination of any of the specific uses. So that's kind of a catch-all. So really anything you can do a PD. The difference between a PD zoning and a regular zoning is a PD also includes a site plan drawing. And the site plan, when you come in for a building permit, you also need a site plan, right, which you don't see. The site plan doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it should be generally consistent is the term, which, again, you don't see. So we want to make sure that what we're asking for in the PD and what you're going to make a decision on, because then it goes on to council, is that PD have enough information so that when they come in for building permits, it's appropriate for the area. So they really, as a minimum, they need to show all the buildings. They should show the setbacks too, or have a scale that's 1 inch is 200 feet or whatever, so you know you can measure it. All the parking spots, all the driveways should be shown. Okay, it doesn't have to get into, and again, if landscaping is required, they should also show where the trees are. But it doesn't have to be as detailed as an engineering, or a professionally engineered drawing per se at the building permit stage, But it definitely needs to be to scale, should show parking, and should show, like this one's really good. This was done recently, so they've got their drive-through. So if it's a restaurant that has a drive-through that's allowed in the PD, that would also be helpful.
I have one
Oh,
Residential, or just commercial?
just commercial.
Now, for residential, we can do PDs for housing, and as you've seen, we brought over to P and Z for housing or development, residential development. Now, council, it is best that when they bring a site plan, it's more detailed. We do require the layout of how the houses will be built, any type, how the driveways will be placed or where they will be placed, you know. In a single family residential, they require always 2 vehicles, but it has to meet a certain criteria when it comes to the parking spaces.
For a one-person
Number-
like beauty shop is what you're talking about.
I'm sorry?
Like a one-person beauty shop, is that what you're talking about? They-
No,
they have-
I'm talking about residential developments.
Okay.
For under plan development.
Okay, oh, I see.
Residential housing under plan development.
Okay, I
So
see.
yes, it would have to be more detailed because we do have to present those to the city council, and they do ask a lot of questions. So yes, dimensions and specifics on residential is more important to them. They want to be able to see it.
How much leeway or authority as Planning and Zoning Commission do we have to nitpick either the residential PD or commercial PD?
You can request how it's gonna be laid out. You can tell us, if it's not like an MU, PDMU or PD housing, you can request to see, you know, how the house will be, what's the square footage is, okay?
Well, on the one that's on the screen, that commercial plan development, and you know, it's showing a donut shop. And that's, we actually had that several years ago. It was gonna be
Yes.
Shipley's Donut, never got built. But we had 2 things, you know, neighbors complaining about the smell because in that particular site, there was deed restrictions against restaurants.
Yes.
And so neighbors were complaining. And the other thing that we didn't get into, but kind of came up, was traffic. If you had a donut shop right there, that's coming off Loop 338, very short distance between the light and that turn-in, and you'd have concern with traffic backing up. We have the same issue on 8th Street with Jumborito. Every morning, traffic backs up on 8th Street, creating a very dangerous situation.
Yes.
So,
when-
as commission, you know, if we see something like that, what kind of objections can we make?
So I can help and I can jump in. So in those cases, you can request for staff to come up and to give you more of an explanation of that. Usually they have had, so that would fall under our Public Works, our engineering department.
Yep.
And usually they have already been working with the engineer that submitted the design, and most likely they've already done that analysis. So the conversation has been done internally. We wouldn't bring it up unless it would be an issue. And usually it's addressed. Like, we have a lot of here that, we have engineers here that sit on our boards, and they do the analysis prior to. If it's gonna be an issue, that's when our engineering team would ask. So if you just request, that's why Joe Tucker's always in our meetings, is because you can ask for him to give you an explanation. If you think we have not done the proper research, then you can ask, can we ask for XYZ? And then he'll tell you yes or no, depending on their codes.
Can we reject and make a motion not to approve that particular presentation because we don't like the fact of the way the traffic pattern is, or?
Yes, you can. You can use that as a factor. So, there's 2 things you want to look at in every decision. So if you're especially if you're recommending denial, number 1, is there a rational nexus? So the hard thing it's harder with traffic, but if you can prove that they don't have adequate space on the property, maybe their drive-through lane's not long enough, or maybe the anticipated traffic demand is like it's pretty clear, like if it's a Chick-fil-A and it's only like 0.11 acres, that's probably not going to be enough for all that overflow traffic. So then you could deny, or what might be more prudent is to say, we'll table the item, and we want like either a minor traffic study or just more numbers to show this kind of situation and then come back in 2 weeks or in a month and we'll have another meeting on it. So that's kind of what I recommend instead of unless you know it's an absolute fail, it's spot zoning, then you would deny. But in case of a PD, just because you know it's based on conditions, again, you guys have the authority, but I would recommend just tabling it for a month or 2 weeks to give them time to address that. But yes, you can absolutely deny it based on traffic.
Right, so we're not, so many times we are rubber stamped, but there are times we're not. On that particular one, we got lots of phone calls from the public.
And also, when you do deny something, the applicant still has the ability to say, we're gonna, appeal.
Right,
So if they appeal, that means that they still go to council, but it is walking in with your denial.
I would like to add that when it is a PD, a planned development, we do send notifications to surrounding property owners. And that's why we did, have a lot of people at the time come in.
Oh, yeah.
However, sometimes they don't send in their protest cards, so we don't have a percentage of how many are actually protesting. And that's something that impacts the percentage where you can, where it is automatically denied or not.
Oh, yeah, on that, I got a quick question. If they're not within that 200 foot, can they turn in any kind of posted?
No, we don't.
So this right here, there's nothing.
They're not even
if you're-
200 feet,
There's
yeah.
nothing close to
So,
200 feet.
in that section.
Well, there are
for the
5
donuts-
houses right behind it.
Yeah,
There's some on the alley back
but-
here.
Yeah,
The alley,
there is.
but-
They're
but-
pretty close.
Property line,
Right.
200 feet.
yes.
Yeah.
But we had people from that neighborhood calling because they were concerned about restaurant smells.
Yeah. But can it only be those 5, or, I mean, is it, because
No.
they're within the 200?
It's depending on, since that corner, well, initially it was the whole lot. It was one big old section, one
Yeah.
lot, correct? So what we did is when we sent the notifications, we sent them to the surrounding property owners of that lot. So it was outside those boundaries, 200 feet outside those boundaries, when it was actually one lot.
Yeah,
Right.
So they can actually hear the petitions of people that are outside of the 200 also?
they are, yes.
Right, it's a public hearing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So she
And
sends
so-
it to more than just
More.
that.
Yeah, and
Just
so
that
you
little
see
area
if-
right there.
Since the donut shop did not come to fruition, if they come back and try to do something else, we will have to bring it back to P and Z. And we will have to notify the surrounding property owners of that specific lot.
Well, I wanted the donut shop.
Well, yeah, I did. I was just outside the 200 feet, but, people complained,
Yeah.
instead of getting a donut shop, they got a car wash. Just on the other side of
The
it.
car wash is just right there, yeah.
Yeah, and I let me correct that last part, because you could recommend, at that point, you really only could recommend that it's tabled, right? Because if you're because city council has the approval authority for a PD or a regular zone change, even if you tried to deny it, you can only recommend denial. So if they really wanted to push it, they could just keep going to city council. But hopefully most developers are responsible, and if you told them, hey, I have serious concerns about the traffic, or we got a lot of letters against this that are beyond the 200 feet, that would be an opportunity for you to say, okay, if I'm the developer, I would hopefully agree with you and say, yeah, let's table it and come back and then have the P&Z part of it. But if they really wanted to push it, they could say, no, I don't care, I'm going on to council, and technically they wouldn't have to listen to you, which is kind of, like I said, it's unfortunate, but it's the way the code is written here. Other cities, if P&Z could actually deny it or could actually force them to come back, but if they wanted to keep going, they could. Hopefully they would listen to you.
Right. Well, we still have the right to make objection and listen to
Yes.
objections.
Yeah, and that's the advantage. That's the reason to have you guys with P&Z or ZBAs, because then they have to go through that more of that kind of local feel, that public, less political kind of route, and talk about it more on the issues, and then it would go on, and that helps council too, because council will take, just like you guys take what we say in the memo important, then council also looks at your recommendation.
But we're
and-
ambushed as a commission, but the council's not, because it's brought out
That's right.
prior to ever going to the council.
But the good news is that they will weigh heavily on staff, and especially on what P&Z says. So if you're recommending denial, our council here is pretty good, and the new mayor, they're not just going to be like, oh yeah, we'll just approve it. They're going to read the report and they're going to ask you questions. So it's again, it's more, the whole thing's back to transparency and to have really, you guys are the subject matter experts, so they trust your, so with P and Z and ZBA, and I really mean that genuinely, because then, again, all of the decisions you're making are all revolving around land use. Council is looking at the political route and the bigger picture, right? So they've got so much stuff to deal with. They're so tied up with all that stuff. So the boards really help them, and that's why if we had more historical properties, we have a historic commission as well. So if we ever do get a request in a historic district, they can meet, and then you have all those other finance and other boards that do those things too. So long story short, for PDs, site plan is required. We can put site-specific standards, and you all can recommend more standards, and then council then will make the decision and can go with your recommendation, and they can even add more stuff as well. Let's hold off, and when we get to the SUPs in a minute, because I don't want to run out of time. PDs and specific use permits are both based on conditions. So when we go over the SUP in a minute, it's going to be the same stuff that you can also recommend for your PD conditions. Sorry about that. One moment. Hello?
I just have any questions. It's our food, that's why.
It's for your lunch. Yes.
Do you guys have any other questions in the meantime?
Liz,
Yeah, the
I
coast is
have a
clear.
question to Connie. She mentions a couple of bills, house bills and senate bills on the manufactured homes, or was it mobile homes, or which?
Manufactured homes. Is this what
Manufactured
happened?
homes, okay. What was that number?
Sorry, y'all. That was Jason Stelly calling me. So
You're
lunch
okay.
will be here very
They
shortly.
want their money first, huh?
The Senate bill is $785 by Flores. The House bill is $1835 by Gulen.
Okay, 785 and 1835.
35.
All right, thank you.
So with that manufactured, that would, currently right now, if it doesn't have a deed restriction, in order to put a mobile home, you would change it to mixed use? Or what would you change to be able to allow a mobile home into,
So,
just as a,
so MH, mobile,
Uh-huh.
MH, that's the zoning that you're allowed to have a
MH.
mobile home.
Yeah.
Like, let's say, for example, there's a parcel of land, 10 acres out
Mhm.
there, and they want to convert that into a mobile home. Just like any other zoning, they have the right to come in front of you guys and ask for that zone change. We have criterias for it that we prefer to see, like, okay, are they next to like housing? Are they next to like industrial? Is it a great fit? So that's how we analyze it, and then we present to you guys, and then it's something that goes through the process in order to get rezoned for that. So we're not saying you can't have mobile homes, it's just we're being more strategic of plan development. Does it fit in this area? Does it go with it? Now, let's say, because we are changing our ordinance and we are removing the mobile homes in a lot of the zonings, like the GR, I can't remember all of the other ones right now. That doesn't mean that the existing mobile homes that are there can't be there. They would be considered legal non-conforming. They can stay there. When they're maybe time that they need to be swapped out because they're not, to the standards anymore, or it's too old, then they can do the swap as long as they don't change the footprint of it. If they now go to a bigger size, then that's where you would see them in the ZBA board, where they will come in front of you and ask for that permission, and it's up to you guys to determine do they have a valid justification for that to continue
What we were
to be
talking
there.
about, there's some House bills and Senate bills that they're talking about, that are. in
making
the-
it illegal to not permit
Yeah.
mobile homes
Affordable.
through the state?
Manufactured homes.
So there's,
Manufactured
and
There's
there's
a
different,
difference.
remember, there's a different definition about the mobile homes
Mobile
and
homes and
manufactured
manufactured
homes.
housing, there's two different types.
Yes.
They have to be converted to be, there's two different
Yes,
types.
so there are different regulations of them, and
It's HUD, this is a new housing affordability.
Yeah.
um,
And
so
even
it's a
though
big deal in
they're,
the House and Senate right
even
now.
though they are approved, we still comply to our ordinance as well. So depending on what our ordinance is, we'll adjust to whatever they pass or they don't pass.
Right.
So
Okay.
if they pass it and it's, like, for example, before we were able to kind of dictate, you need to paint your house purple. That's my ordinance. Well, the state said, no, you cannot tell people what color they need to paint their house. So now we had to adjust in order to
Exactly.
not be able to put those restrictions
Yeah,
on them.
that's what we're talking about, yeah.
So,
Okay.
And then there's another one that he was talking about, that they were asking about, that the new one that says, Senate Bill 15 and House Bill 3919, that says, allow property owners who own more than 5 undeveloped acres to bypass city requirements on minimum lot size to allow for more dense housing.
More congestion.
and that will depend on where it's at. And I would have to look it up. I have to read it because usually they say one thing, but there's criterias and more information on it. And it depends, like, is it based on the jurisdiction? Are you, like regional? Are you urban? Like, what in that area you're falling into as well?
Okay.
So
It's
I would
ur-
have to
it's-
make,
it's urban.
that one is new, so I haven't
It's
seen
urban,
it.
it's new, it's urban,
So-
but it's got since it's got such, it's real high up on the list, so that's why it's got a Senate Bill 15. So anytime that the bills are that high, that means it's a very high priority bill. So anytime it's a Senate Bill 15, that means it's very high on the Senate bill list, so that means it's a very high priority
That
list.
involves making more
And
money.
I'm not sure if Jeff has gotten there, but we always go to, or
Not
he's the
what's
one
good
that
for the
tends to go
community.
to whenever the new codes got passed. He gets the updates of all of them, and then he's the one that has to make sure we update our ordinance to
Right, right, and
everything.
these are just, so you just
And
might be
it's-
aware of some of these things that are going
Yeah.
on. They're
And that's
very
usually
minor.
happens in November. That's when we know what is officially passed and what has not passed.
Those are some pretty biggies that would affect y'all pretty big,
Oh, yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna.
I'll let you.
That's okay. I'm going to go through the last two modules fairly quickly, but I'm going to make sure to hit the main points. We might be able to circle back after lunch. I just want to make sure you guys get your sandwiches. But the plating is very important. So we've covered this already. So let's get in very short on specific use permits, and then I want to really take the last 10 minutes and focus on plats, especially for P&Z, because you're going to be looking at so many of them. So specific use permit, this is where the zoning is already in place, but certain zoning districts allow a use with the extra step of having to do a specific use permit. So a perfect example would be a repair garage. Maybe I'm in the neighborhood, Maria, correct me, what's the name of that? Is it neighborhood commercial, NC? NS, okay. So like if you're in an NS zone, that's kind of a commercial designation, but it's more localized, you would need a specific use permit to do a repair garage, or I can't remember if it's that one or the R, but in certain areas that are close to residential. Electrical substation, so the pictures kind of say it right there. Also, someone can have a one-person beauty shop in a residential house, and it's say single-family zoning, but there's certain restrictions and they need to go through an SUP process. So there's a couple little things they can do. So that's where it's very similar to a PD, right, where you could put conditions. The difference is PD, you're actually changing the zoning. And SUP, the zoning's already there, but you need the extra step to do an SUP within the zoning district for certain things. So that's the same process as a zone change. You go to P&Z, so you all just recommend, and then it goes on to City Council for 2 readings. So it's almost the same as a zone change, but it's more site-specific, and it's more being able to put conditions. So they need a site plan, just like a PD. They might need building renderings to show things, just like a PD. And then the public meetings, not gonna go. It's the same thing. You need an application. Go to P&Z. P&Z recommends, and then goes to council. So this is the slide that I was trying to show you. That's similar to a PD. So Mr. Peacock and some of you all were asking about what kind of conditions can I put in. So the 2 things. So here are some of the things. Fencing, you can shield the lights. You can impose hours of operation and say that, hey, the repair garage, it's really close to a residential neighborhood. So, you have to shut down, let's say, after 8 o'clock or something. Or maybe you're a restaurant or something like that, and they do stay open later. They have an alcohol license. So that one you might say midnight, or you might even allow 2 a.m. if it's only on the weekends. The city that I grew up in, whenever the World Cup, the soccer thing would come on, was very contentious, and neighbors, some of the downtown urban areas, people would stay up late and watch the soccer games, and then they'd have a big party afterwards and go to the restaurants and bars, and some of those apartment buildings nearby, that people would get upset. But again, that mixed use zoning, or that CB, Central Business District, is going to obviously allow some commercial activities on the weekends. Can't really stop people from having a party. But in close to a single family residential area where there's no commercial, that's where you can definitely, those are where those SUPs are usually going to be required. Courts have ruled there's really two things when you're putting in conditions of approval that you want to know. Again, I'm not an attorney, but these are just the things that attorneys have taught us as planners over the years, and it still holds up today. So one is there has to be a rational reason or a rational nexus for the condition. Okay, so if you just say, I want you to shield the lights on your restaurant because you're next to a home because I just don't like the light style, that's not a rational nexus. It's easy. Yeah.
No.
But if you say, I need you to shield the lights because the glare of the lights is, especially at night, is shining too much on, like a city I worked in, guy had a golf driving range, and the lights were just shining straight out into the field, and then there was houses back there. And from my angle and from the code compliance officer, it did not look like a problem. But when you're on that side and you're with the residents and they see that shining through the window, even if it's 1,000 feet away, could be a problem. So basically, if it's tied to public health and safety, that's a rational nexus. The second test for certain things is called rough proportionality. And so what that means is that in addition to it being rational related to the issue, it also has to be proportional. So what you can't do is, if you say, all right, I want you to shield the lights, I want you to buy the most expensive light shields that are $3,000 each for your 2 lights and ding them with $6,000. That's not rough proportionality. If they can do it the cheapest and fastest way, and it still aesthetically looks good, then that's rough proportionality. Another example would be in a subdivision of only 3 homes, saying, I want you to put in a massive park for the city for the benefit of all these other people over here. That's not fair to the developer. However, if they have 50 lots and our recreation and parks plan says that this is an area where we want at least a small, we call it a pocket park, that would be rough proportionality, because you're saying for 50 lots, they should have a little place to go with their kids and walk their dogs, but not a massive park that would be more citywide. That wouldn't be roughly proportional. So those are the two things. So you can also put a condition of time on an approval. So you can, you want to be careful with these ones because there's some legal challenges, but for example, you could say this use, we're not really sure, it's a new kind, maybe it's a new kind of use that's allowed by zoning, but it's not something that's done a lot in Odessa. You could put a year time limit on it and make them come back, and you could check the code complaints and the police reports if you wanted to. This is almost rarely used, but it's something to think about. But most of it's going to be design criteria. So most of the things you're going to do is going to be like lighting, landscaping, fencing, and hours of operation. If you put any conditions at all, or like Maria was saying, you might need to modify something on the drawing, or like Mr. Peacock was saying with the traffic issue, you might want to, you could put a condition that says that. So another thing you could do, instead of making them come back, you could say one recommendation when it goes to council is submit a revised site plan that shows, so between now and that meeting, a revised plan that maybe shows in an extra 3 parking spots over here. As long as the original letter that went out only talks about the text and doesn't get into the details like that, that probably could be something appropriate. And then when it gets to council could say that the planning staff have the authority. They probably wouldn't in most cases, but some cities will do that and say, you can submit a revised site plan at time of building permit that shows the adjustments, so they don't have to go back to council again and show the extra 3 parking spots, so they can have planning staff approve that. Okay, so we talked about this.
Time restraints on it, what happens if they don't meet the time restraints?
Yeah, so the time constraint wouldn't be more, it wouldn't be something like it expires in a year. It could be more something like, in a year, if you're meeting the codes and there's no complaints or something like that, you could do that. If you're putting in a constraint where it's like it will expire, then you have to tie it to a condition that they have to do within the year. You can't just, like, again, so the proportionality, you can't just say, I don't like something, so it expires in a year. But you could put a condition that says that in a year you have to do X, Y, and Z to demonstrate that you're still in compliance with the ordinance. So again, I don't want to draw too much attention to that. That's not very used, but just so you know, you could do that. Especially the hours of operation, you definitely could do. So you could say, even if TABC says it's open till 2 a.m., if you don't feel comfortable with that use, you could say midnight and then have them argue it and go to council and put those limits if you want. So best practices, so really quick, will the use generate too much traffic? Okay, so the blue is how you would respond with a condition. So you could restrict an entry if they have double frontage. They have an arterial road and then they have a local road and it's a restaurant. You could put in a condition that says when they go to plat it that they put a restriction and they don't allow any traffic from the local road. So all the driveways are from the commercial road. That would be logical. We talked about the lighting. The sound. You could prohibit outdoor speakers after a certain time. You want to be careful with that one because the noise ordinance does allow them to have outdoor speakers within so many decibels. But again, you could put conditions on that. If there's something like that's vibrating, so like a loud noise from, say, an industrial area, you could put a limit on, you could make them do the use, put a condition that says it can only be done indoors. I had a case once in another city. They were they test tires to make sure for Goodyear that the tires are appropriate for trucks and cars. And it was very noisy what they were doing. So they agreed to put it within the building and have limit the hours of operation. And it worked. They came back a year later, expanded the project again, staying within the walls. They proved that the wall was soundproof. So you could really get into a lot of detail. Just make sure that what you're asking for, again, is reasonable. Okay. Subdivision plats. We've got about 5-7 minutes left. So this is very important. I want to make sure we just cover this and then we should break.
Can I ask one thing
Yep.
about so whenever we're restricting things, so we were talking about this when I was in Austin yesterday, so it was fresh on my mind. So there was a really nice subdivision that they had, and so they came in and they built this big power plant or this battery storage plant right next to this beautiful subdivision. And so now all these people that built their dream homes, now they came in and they built this big this big battery storage plant. And so it operates all the time, and of course those battery storage plants are very hot and they loud. And so now is there any way that we're talking about doing that here in our area too. Is there any way that we can go in there with planning and zoning and restrict us building we're getting a new subdivision, let's say Shiloh, and someone owns the land right next to that? Can we go in there and restrict it from being 1,000 feet from whatever being built, go in there and amend Shiloh's subdivision from anything being built next to that subdivision 1,000 feet, so nobody could ever build next to some of these subdivisions, so no one's value is going to be brought down, or no one, whoever wants to buy, decides they want to sell their land to whoever, and they don't really care who they're building next to. I mean, I think they're going to try to do something legislative-wise, where if someone tries to do that they have to go on and buy everybody's property right next to that. But just in case, it's just going to be a problem for anybody, because nobody realizes how hot and how loud those things are, and we're starting to get a lot of those in Texas right now.
So that's where the land use comes into play, that's where we wouldn't want an industrial right next to a residential, and that comes into play. And that's actually, the other key element is that's where the community has to come together, right?
Yeah.
Because if you have a 20% of objections, now they have to vote by supermajority. So that means that when it goes to council, that item will pretty much everybody but one person will have to say yes to it. So that's where the community has to be aware of what's going on. And that's why we sent the notices out, so they know, but
Yeah.
again, we only sent it out to the 200 buffer, so it depends to those people that are receiving that notice to be able to inform the rest of the people that are going.
So that's probably what happened in that situation. They probably didn't realize the extent of what those plants are, what happens. It's probably just got by, was probably new, and had no idea what that was gonna be. They probably thought battery storage, what kind of idea, what is a battery storage? And so now people are knowing
Yeah.
how loud those plants are and what they do and how they run 24 hours and there's no time. So I think that's probably what happened up
Yeah,
there.
and that's why you guys, not to put you under pressure, but you have a very important job, you know, it's like
Yeah.
you ask the difficult questions. We
Yeah.
have to be neutral. We have, our job is to fight for the codes, for what we're seeing and what is going on. So we might have an opinion and we might wanna be able to ask something, but we are limited to what we can
Right.
ask.
So I think now this plant's already been built, so that probably 5 years ago, if you really didn't know what a battery plant was coming, you're probably,
yeah.
oh, it's just a battery
Yes.
storage. They're probably just
Yes.
going in and storing little batteries, and you probably didn't have any idea if those plants run 24 hours a day. They're hot, they're loud, and it's very, yeah, so.
It's the same like
That's
kind of
unfortunate.
with like the data centers, you know,
Yeah.
it's the same thing. They're abandoned they're so big and everything, we don't know, like.
They're very
what-
loud, very hot,
Yes.
and so they put off a lot of light, heat, and so
We need to be aware of
Yeah,
We have
that's
two
unfortunate.
options. I can get this done in the next 5 minutes, but do you want to break now for lunch? And then you would have to stay a little, Norma, I think, would want to start right away, and then I can finish the plat slide after? Or do you, so we might go over time a little, or do you want me to finish it now?
doing that.
Right here? Okay, let's do it. This is important just again because of the volume of the work that you do. So basically a subdivision plat is a map or tract of land. It's showing the division and location of lots and the placement of streets, easements, utilities, and other information useful to the developers. 212, so 211 is your zoning and your variances. 212 of the state law, Texas Local Government Code, is almost everything for subdivisions in the city. And then there's also the ETJ, and I need to remember that section, but basically it's similar, follows a similar format. Now, our ETJ is within 5 miles of the city, so we have the authority, you all have the authority as P&Z members to approve plats that are in the city limits or within that 5-mile radius in the ETJ. In the ETJ, they don't need to have water and sewer. So one thing you need to make sure, and in planning we'll check that too, all the lots have to be at least 1 acre in size if they're in the ETJ, if they're on a private septic system, and if they're on well water. If they're getting a municipal authority that's giving them the water, they still need the septic system. They can go down to half an acre. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle, but yeah, it's usually an acre in the ETJ. So that's basically your subdivision. So these are the types of subdivisions in Odessa. So we require a preliminary plat, okay, for almost all types of plats, with the exception of something called a short form. And a short form plat, which is on the next page, is when you have 3 lots or less, you're not extending water and sewer, you don't need to add a road or anything. So there's no public improvements required. Somebody's just platting literally just 3 lots on an existing road with existing water and sewer. That could go straight to final plat. They would skip that first step. So if you see that little diagram there, hope that makes sense. So your preliminary is your blueprint. So the preliminary sets out where the streets are going to go. The preliminary plat sets out where the water and the sewer lines are going to go in the future. It shows the lot configurations, the streets, how the streets are going to go and where they're going to connect to, the names of the streets as well for the future. That's all in your preliminary. Preliminary, once you all approve, so unlike zoning where it's got to go on to council as well for a final vote, plats, P&Z, you guys are the approval authority. And then they have to request an appeal to go to city council, okay? Once the preliminary plat's done, it does not get recorded. You can't get a building permit. It's just a blueprint for future growth. The advantage of having it, now when you go to step 2, you need to submit your final plat. The final plat will incorporate, this should be, and the term is substantially consistent. So that's up to Maria and her department, but generally it should look the same. So if the preliminary plat shows the road curving and there's 50 lots, the final plat should show the road curving in 50 lots, generally. At the final plat stage, it goes to the public meeting. You all vote to approve, and then they have to enter into an improvements agreement, and the improvements agreement secures the roads and the sewer and the water mains that they have to pay for. Again, if they're already on water and sewer and they're already in the city, then it may just be, there may not be an improvements agreement, or it may just be very minimal things. Then the developer takes the Mylar, which is the glossy, clear, transparent, and they file that with the county, and it becomes recorded. It gets a document number, which, again, most of you know this because the chair signs the plats along with the planning director and the city engineer. Once it's recorded officially, at that point, the building permit process can move forward. And I want to speak for them because building inspections aren't here. There are cases where if you submit your permit at the same time as your plat, they might start the review of the permit to save some time later, but they cannot issue the permit until that plat is recorded and gets a legal document number. So that's the difference. The preliminary plat is the blueprint. It sets the framework, the plan for the future. The final plat implements the plan, gets recorded. Now you can move forward. If 3 is a replat, so if the final plat has already been done, and then 5 years later, hey, I want to cut up lot where it says lot 4 there, and I want to create 2 lots because it meets the zoning lot sizes. I want to create a 4A and a 4B so I can put 2 more homes because the lots were made a lot bigger than what the zoning says. That would be your top level there in the yellow, the replat. So I take the final plat and I cut it up into 4 pieces. That's a replat. And remember, if it's residential for single or 2 family zoning, SF1, SF2, SF3, SF4, 2F1 or 2F2, or a PD that limits it to that was already there, that needs to have a newspaper notice and the 200 feet. All the other plats do not have to have the 200-foot notices sent out. And again, staff takes care of that. So the replats will always, for residential, single or 2 family, will always go on as a public hearing because the state requires it. The preliminary plats go on miscellaneous, and the final plats, because again, they're already a follow-up to the preliminary plat, the final plats can just go and on consent usually. Okay, so then remember, the short form plat is basically, I've got 3 lots or less, I'm not making any public improvements, not putting in sewer, not widening the road. Okay, then that skips the preliminary and you just go straight to final. So that one's easier. Okay, the other ones that won't come up as often, I'm going to go to 6 and go back to 5 because that's how my brain is right now. But the amending plats are just administrative. That's where Maria can approve. Those are things where let's say you're encroaching. You find out later, I bought a house. Oh no, my house encroaches over to the neighbor, and my mortgage lender or whatever, they're not letting me buy the property. You can do something called a lot line adjustment, which is a type of amending plat. And you can shift the lot line over 5 feet so that your house doesn't encroach on the neighbor. As long as both lots still meet the minimum lot sizes and the lot frontage widths in the zoning ordinance, and you want to just make that tweak, you can do that. Both owners would have to be privy to the application. Both owners would have to sign. You could get one consultant to represent you both. That would be a faster process. That's something that Maria can do without having to go to P&Z. The other one, which most likely will go to P&Z, is called a plat vacation, which is kind of silly because you take a vacation for 2 weeks, then you have to go back to work. This means I'm vacating it forever. So it's a permanent vacation. I'm getting rid of the plat. I don't want to plat these 100 lots anymore. I want to build a baseball stadium instead because we got a new team in Odessa or something like that. So now I'm going to remove the plat. That would also show a document saying that. That would go to P&Z. You would vote on that, and then they would file that document with, and I think, I should know this, but I think the document includes a drawing of the plat, and it has to say vacating plat per state law, yeah. So you file that, and now as someone goes back, they can see, oh, Shady Acres lot, section 1, Shady Acres section 2, oh, vacating plat of Shady Acres, so now Shady Acres is gone. And now someone else can come in with a new plat or a new design and start the process over. So it's basically going back to like Greenfield again. Doesn't happen often, but you might get a couple of those. Okay, So standards for approval, I was saying final plots must substantially conform. Also, it needs to conform to the general plan of the municipality. Now, we have a comprehensive plan, but it's very general. So at this point, I think since the subdivision and the zoning ordinance implements those policies from the plan, basically you just want to make sure, the biggest, or the most important department here is engineering, not to take away from planning, but if the city engineer says you must build the road, you have to build the road. If he says you must put in water and sewer or meet their design standards, you have to. Those are technical standards. For planning, we're going to check the zoning and make sure that the lot sizes are there. But I would always double check the memos when you get them from planning before the meeting, just to make sure that, there's what you read is correct and that you understand it. So if someone tries to build to show a lot that's only 4,000 square feet, but the zoning is SF4 and requires 5,000 square feet, they have a problem. They need to go to ZBA and get a variance from the lot size, and they may get it and they may not. That's up to you all to decide. So they don't want to put, as they say, the cart before the horse. So they should be dealing with zone changes and variances before they come in. Platting should always be your last step, or your second last step, and then you go and get your building permits and construct. But you shouldn't be submitting a plat before you have the proper zoning, because then they have an issue with the lot sizes, etc. Okay, and then legal requirements, we've already talked about it. So similar to zoning, you can approve. You can approve with conditions. You can approve with, I should have put a fifth one there, modifications. So if you don't like what staff's recommending our conditions, you can add another condition if there's something, or maybe something comes up. You can disapprove, or the customer, this happens a lot, engineering asks for a drainage study, a drainage plan, and there's not enough time for them to get to meet the conditions of the drainage plan. They would have to do the requesting, but the owner or the owner's representative can request a waiver, which is like tabling it essentially to the next, up to 30 days. So it usually gives you up to the next planning commission or the one after, and then they have 30 days to try to address the issue. And this can keep reoccurring as many times as you want. So it gives the developer an out. It also gives you an out if you're not comfortable saying yay or nay. So you can, with that waiver, the waiver has to be submitted in a signed letter. It should go to the planning department, and the owner should be here to make the request, as the way the state law is written. If they don't, I think it's okay if they have the letter to planning, but 9 times out of 10, they shouldn't be here anyway to say, I want the waiver. They have to ask you for permission. Staff has no authority over that, or planning. You guys have to say if you agree to the waiver or not. Now, I would say if the city engineer and the planning manager are comfortable, it's something like a technical standard that there's just not enough time. What's the advantage of the waiver? They don't have to start over again and get charged. So it just pushes everything back 15 days or 30 days and lets them keep going. That's why. So that's what the waiver is. The other thing is something that, so for appeals, sorry, one more thing. So if you deny the plat, because you're the approval authority, they would then have to, for a preliminary, the current ordinance is 10 days. They have to come in and submit a letter to Maria saying that we're going to appeal within 10 days, and then she'll schedule a meeting, and the meeting will be a request, the motion, something like on the caption on the agenda, a request to appeal the decision of the P&Z, and that would be the council's decision. So council's the appeal authority. If it's a final or a replat, the way it's written right now is a little tricky. So I looked through that. They have 30 days to appeal a final plat that you deny to council, whereas preliminary is only 10. But it has to be based on dedication or improvements. So it'd have to be something like, I don't agree with having to put in a water line here. I don't know why, but that could be an issue or something. Or I don't agree with this part of the drainage report. They could appeal that because it's related to improvements to council. And then council can approve with conditions or disapprove. Once it hits council, council's the final authority. So again, you guys are all approval authority for almost all of the plats. They would then have to initiate an appeal to council. If they don't appeal within that time frame, the plat could be recorded, and we're done. So best practices, basically just read the staff memo and call us if you have any questions, just like the other ones, and you should be okay. So that's it for there was one more thing in here. under state law, I'm just gonna, this probably won't come up very often. If you deny a plat based on them not meeting a condition, they could, at any time, that's the way the state law is, say 3 years from now, they could come back with the same final plat with that condition, and then the city, so it could be you or it could be administrative, the city would then have to act within 15 days. I think I may have skipped the shot clock. So, sorry, all of these plats have to be approved within 30 days per the state law. I think you all know that anyway. But if you deny something and they come back calling it a resubmission, state law, now we have a 15-day shot clock. And it's loose the way it's written, so I'm thinking we should probably tweak the subdivision ordinance so it's spelled out clearly, but I think it could then be done by staff, because how would we have time? Like, we'd have to set the meeting date. So for now, just know Maria and her staff are doing a great job, so are y'all. If we see a plat, we're gonna move on it right of way. And if the developer doesn't request a waiver, right, and we're getting like on day 26 and the meeting's on Monday on the 29th day, we would probably recommend denial as staff, which basically not because we don't like the plat, but because they haven't addressed a condition. And we would recommend that you guys also vote to deny. If they don't request a waiver to extend it another 15 or 30 days, and you don't have the information you need, feel free to recommend denial of that plat and then have them start over. That's really on them for not being, the developer not being prudent. But we try to reach out to them, and planning staff will reach out. So we have Maria can tell you more about that over lunch, but we have a pre-platting conference that we meet. So after the submission's in, we all meet on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock, and we go over all of this. So if we flag issues or engineering flags an issue, we don't have a drainage report, okay, we'll tell them right away. So, and we'll tell them about the 30-day waiver. So if they don't resolve it and then we go to the meeting, that's really on them. And you'd probably want to recommend denial in that situation. Okay, so that's it. I've emailed all these to you. Shayna was kind to print copies of the PowerPoint. I'm also going to send you later on, before I leave today, the sections of the city code. It's called E-Code 360. If you want printed copies, I suggest no, because it's more paper and things could change. If there's ever an ordinance change, now you have an old copy. But I will send you the link to the E360 and where you can find the whole subdivision ordinance, where you can find the whole zoning ordinance to look at. But we tried our best to cover, I tried my best to cover everything in here. And with all of them, they made it a lot easier for me. So I want you guys to enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn and eat.
Thank you there, sir.